or if you do watch and you need a refresher the next time you want to do this, we'll kind of have that posted on our website for you. So those of you who maybe have been to some of these trainings before kind of know the drill. So my goal is to just briefly kind of describe a single task and how to do that within Essence. And so today we're going to focus on how to create a stratified time series graph. What the training is basically going to follow this job aid that I'll pop into the chat here. You can find it on the Essence user resources page. So, you'll have that as the guide. You can either kind of walk through it with me now, or just have it as a reference for whenever you're interested in doing this. But that job aid kind of walks you through this process step by step. And the idea is, you can create the stratification by demographics or facility type or year over year. And I will kind of try to keep an eye on the chat while I'm going, but if not, I'll at least get to your questions at the end. This shouldn't take the full hour by any means, so we should have plenty of time. Okay, so just before we get into the demonstration, I thought it might be helpful just as a reminder to think about like why this stratification of a time series graph might be useful. So in general, if you were comparing the burden or the trend in different demographic groups or perhaps in different geographic areas, that would be a good reason to do this. If you were interested in the relative visit volume, either by facility or facility type, that would be another thing that might this might come in handy for. And then I think for me personally, the one that comes in handy most often is to do kind of this year over year type of trend. So the graph that's showing on this slide is heat-related illness visits by month in Virginia, and would just give you like a really quick snapshot of perhaps how the current year is comparing to the previous few seasons, for example. So that's kind of the goal for what we're trying to do. So what I'm going to do is basically just walk through a couple of examples of how to do this. It's pretty straightforward once you know where to go, but like I've mentioned before in some other Essence trainings, I think that the Essence system isn't necessarily set up in a way that's immediately user friendly and obvious about how to get things done. So hopefully this will give you a little bit of a better idea. And I should have mentioned at the beginning, but the sort of intended audience for this training are those of you who are active Essence users. So if you do not yet have an Essence account, and that's something that would be important to you for your job duties, then you'll need to request an account in order to be able to access the system and do this task. So where I am right here is the Essence homepage. So when you log into Essence, this is the first thing that you see. And when you want to do a stratified time series, you need to start with just creating a time series graph to begin with. So I'm going to go over to the query portal. So that's probably one of the more common destinations within Essence for where you want to land. And we'll do as the initial example, looking at diagnosed acute respiratory illness on a weekly trend over the past few years, and then we'll do the year over year overlay. So even though this training is not specifically about how to use the query portal, I will kind of walk through the steps to create the query, but it'll be kind of a little bit faster than if that was kind of our focus for today. So let's say I'm interested in doing a weekly time resolution, and I want to compare, say, 2024 to the previous 2 years. So I'll start it at the very first week of 2022. And then one thing you'll notice within Essence is every time you open the query portal, the end date is going to default to either the current day, or if you're doing weekly, it'll default to the current week. So it's always a good practice to step it back 1 week, because we're obviously this week isn't complete yet, so that wouldn't make sense to use it. And one other tip I would give you if you're interested in doing the year-over-year comparison, I find those graphs a little bit easier to read if you turn off the Essence alerts. So that's this detector piece up here. So I just will switch that to no detection, and that'll get rid of the red and yellow alerts. Now you may want to keep them. If you do, that's fine. But I tend to like the graphs a little bit cleaner, so I usually turn that off. So then I'm going to scroll over to my filters down to kind of the midway where we have these stored CC and DD categories. And I'm going to choose the broad acute respiratory diagnosis category. So I'll select that. And then let's say I'm interested in limiting it to emergency department only. So I'm going to scroll a little further to facility type and select both the hospital emergency rooms as well as the freestanding emergency care centers. And I'll leave out the urgent cares for this example. So I'll select that. And those pop up over here. That's how I know that they've kind of been added to my query as I want to run it. And now I'm just going to run it as a time series, and initially it's just going to be a single time series. So if this runs real quickly, I will use this one, but I have it saved in another tab. If it doesn't load real quick for me, we'll use that one instead. Sometimes things run more quickly and sometimes not as much. Sometimes depends on your internet connection and the data query and stuff like that. But okay, so this is the important part to kind of keep an eye on when you're learning how to do this. So the Essence has generated the time series graph, and I probably have mentioned this to you before, but it doesn't immediately show you, it doesn't remind you anyway what query you ran. So you kind of need to either change the title of your graph or kind of make a note to yourself so you don't lose track of what you were running. But the key point is that up above the time series graph, you'll see a couple of options to expand menus, and one of them is titled Data Series Options, and that's the one that we're interested in. So if you click on the plus to expand Data Series Options, then you get these choices for doing either within or across graph stratification. So, basically, it is as described. So you can stratify within the same graph, or you can create separate graphs for each level of the stratification, depending on what you're interested in doing. For the year over year, I'm interested in keeping it in the same graph so that I can see how it compares. So you have to go to the very bottom of the within graph stratification menu to choose year, if that's what you want to do, the year over year comparison. So I've chosen year in within graph, and then I just click update. And kind of similar to when you're running the query originally, it may take a little bit to generate that year over year time series. It just kind of depends on what the query was that you're running and the time frame that you're querying the system. So we'll give it a minute to kind of load that, and then I'll show you a couple of other examples. Okay, so now we have the yearly acute respiratory diagnosis data, and you can see that it did the legend down at the bottom so that each year is a different color. So the 2024 data here are actually, oh, interesting. So right on this week, last week, everything was this exact same for the past 3 years in a row. So that can kind of give you the perspective. And of course, I would recommend, like, if you're actually going to use this graph, I would go to the graph options to customize the title and the axis, and then you could download the actual image file if you're putting it kind of into a PowerPoint or some kind of report or something like that. The other thing that you can do, I think this is probably most applicable to respiratory, but maybe other things as well, is you could change the start week so that the, right now it's starting MMWR week 1, January, which might kind of mask some things that are happening in peak respiratory season. So if you were interested in starting at week 40 or whatever, you could change that and then update. So that's kind of the basic idea for how you would do any of these stratifications. But I'll show you a couple of other examples, but I'm going to pause for a minute just to see if that generated any initial questions or thoughts by anybody. Okay. Well, I'll carry on, but throw it in the chat if you think of something that you want to talk about, or if you want me to show something again, I'm happy to do that too. So before we hopped on this training, I ran a different query so that we could do another example. So this one is the weekly percentage of visits for hand, foot, and mouth disease. And this is the percentage kind of over all age groups. But for this particular condition, I have a special interest in the youngest children and kind of who has the burden. So I'm going to expand the data series options. And maybe this time I would like to do separate graphs by age group. And then you have the option when you're doing these separate graphs if you want to have them be large or small or micro. So sometimes when you have a lot of stratification levels, the micrographs can be kind of handy. Just so you can see what those look like, we'll do the across graph stratification with the micrographs. And hopefully that won't take too long to run. I might have had it saved over here. Let's see. Okay, yes. So this is an example of the micrographs stratified by age group, and the micrographs have a specific kind of option that I think is kind of handy. So as you can see, the way these micrographs are set up, the y-axis is the same for all of the groups, which might be what you want. But if you don't, if you would rather have the y-axis vary, you can select this free y-axis, which would allow the axis to be different for each of the age groups. So I think it really just depends on what you're intending to show, on which one of those is most useful. I think for this particular example, I would prefer to keep them the same, because it really illustrates the point that, for this particular condition, the burden is definitely concentrated in the 0 to 4-year-olds. So that's kind of another example of how you could do this. And then maybe we'll run one more example. Let's do, oh, I know I was going to show you. Okay, so we'll look at weekly data again. So this time I'm interested in, let's do the depressive disorders. So say I'm interested in, oh, I think someone's got to open mic, if you could mute. I'm interested in depressive disorder visits to, let's limit again just to emergency departments. Okay, so we'll let that time series generate, and then let's explore the relative burden by sex for this particular condition. So again, just expand the data series option, and I'll do this within the same graph to stratify by sex. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show you as an example. So this graph looks mostly good, right? It's illustrating the point of kind of this higher proportion of visits for depressive disorders occurring among females, but I'm a little bit annoyed by having the extra line down here at the bottom for unknown sex. So one thing that you can do is go back up to configuration options. You have to expand that. And in your available query fields, you can choose sex and filter out the unknowns. So you just would include female and male. So sometimes that's a way to, just kind of get the graph cleaned up. If there are categories in there that aren't providing useful information, particularly if they're kind of hovering near the 0 line, like that one was. So that's just one recommendation for kind of, and you can do that thing with age groups. So another example while we're waiting for this to load would be, so here we go. So this one is cleaned up with the unknown sex removed. Another example for when this might come in handy would be if, say you wanted to show pediatric visits for something. So under 18, but you wanted to break out the 0 to 4, 5 to 17 or something like that. So you could select just those two age groups in the filter in the query, but then when you stratify by age group, since those are the only two you've got, then you would just have those, and the total is just the pediatric visits. So that I think could also be kind of a useful way to display the data sometimes as well. And then again, just as a reminder, I would always recommend kind of the titling at the point you're creating it so you don't lose track of what you're doing. So to just update the titles, and then if you want to download the graph from here, you would get the image. So I think that's all I've got for you. I might have a couple slides that are just reminders and resources. Oh, yeah. So one other thing that may or may not be useful to you sometimes is that if you want, you can choose a stratification both within graph and across graph. So the example that came to mind for me was if you were like a regional epi and you wanted to see graphs stratified by sex, but separately for each health district, maybe that would be, you know, a reason that you would want to kind of do both of the stratifications at the same time. So you would do it the same way that we did the other ones. We already talked about excluding unknowns and turning off the detection. You don't have to do that. So if you would prefer to leave those essence alerts, you certainly could do that. And then we looked at some of the different display options for the micrographs or the larger ones. This is just an example of what the across graph stratification looks like when you use the 10-year age groups as opposed to the default groupings that I originally used. So that's all I've got for you today. We have resources available on the Essence User Resources website, including the job aid that kind of goes through this process. And as always, our team is available to help you if you have specific questions or projects that you're working on where you need a little technical assistance with the Essence system. So that's all I've got. I'll break for questions either in the chat or please feel free to come off mute.
Hey, Meredith,
All right. Oh, yeah.
in
How
the
to
chat,
change
Kelly.
the counts. Okay. Yes, we can do that. So let's see if I still have the hand, foot, and mouth. So if you would prefer to do percents rather than counts, you would use this menu as percent query. So for hand, foot, and mouth, that's what I was doing is the percentage rather than the count of visits. And the thing to remember is you have to put in the choice here what you want in the numerator of the percentage. And if that it feels a little bit fuzzy, I would recommend using the explain query button, which is down kind of at the bottom of the query wizard window, because when you pull it up, it'll show you what's in the numerator and what is in the denominator. So it's saying here, the numerator is all visits that have the specified chief complaint and discharge diagnosis query. That's the hand, foot, and mouth query that I put in there. And the denominator is all visits. If I, just as for sake of argument, if I switch the percent query to age group and then I click the explain query button, oh, that went kind of weird. Let's see, let me do it again and see if it fixes. Then you're going to get the visits that are in that particular age group in the numerator and the other visits, you know, the total visits in the denominator. So it's just important to make sure that you kind of know what you want your percent to be. But typically, I would say most often, I think this is true, you're usually wanting the numerator to be the condition of interest. So that would be either the free text query, the CCNDD, or the CCNDD category that we already have stored. Let's see if the button is fixed. No, it is not. So that looks like a little buggy there, but Kelly, did that answer what you were hoping? Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, I hope that was helpful to you all. If you have other essence tasks that you're wondering how to do, or would appreciate having a demo on, just let me know, or send to our syndromic box. Because
There's
we
another message in the
later.
chat,
Oh,
Meredith. Sorry.
okay. Is there anywhere within the query portal to add other users or share with other users? The two places that you can add or share, Andrea, would be either a saved query, which is the query manager that you're talking about, or a whole dashboard. So on My Essence, when you have a dashboard, you could, share with another user that entire dashboard. So I think typically if you create something in the query wizard that you want to share with somebody, I would recommend saving it up here, save query, and I'm not going to save it, but if you click on, you type a name for the query that you want and you click on save, you will have the option. You could also share it with another user at the point at which you're saving it. So if you've kind of done some work in the query wizard that you would want to share, that's what I'd recommend doing. Sure. Yeah, no problem. Any other thoughts or questions?